So how can we create an effective map? So here are the 5 steps on how you do that. Define purpose and audience, select appropriate data, choose an appropriate map type, apply principles of map design, yung pinag-aralan natin previously, and test and iterate. When we say define purpose and audience, we have to clarify the goal of the map and identify the target audience. For example, a tourist map designed for visitors or a thematic map for researchers. Okay? When kung ang ating audience is yung tourists, no? Yung mga visitors natin, make sure that iga-guide mo sila in such a way na ito yung path po natin papunta sa ating destination. Along this destination, meron ka sa mapa mo yung iba't ibang pictures na makikita. Ito po, nandito po yung view ng ganito, nandito po yung view na ganito, nandito po sa part na to yung ganito, di ba? So dun pa lang, alam mo na kung ano yung purpose ng ginagawa mong mapa. You are making a tourist guide map. Okay? For example, meron din tayong iba't ibang klase ng mapa, yung land use planning, road network plan, road network map. When we see road network map naman, i-emphasize mo doon yung kalsada. Ibibigay mo to sa mga audience mo, ay, siguro mga, for example, mga civil engineers yan, they're looking for roads to pave, no? So, doon pa lang, alam mo na kung anong mapa ang gagawin mo, depende sa audience mo. Okay? Kung sino ang titingin sa yung mapa. Next one is select appropriate data. When we say select appropriate data, choose relevant and accurate data to support the map's purpose. For example, utilizing demographic data for population density map. And also, for example, gagamitin mong mapa, syempre, nagkaroon ka ng ground survey ng proposed concreting of road, yung data na yun ang gagamitin mo to support the map's purpose. Hindi yung gagamitin mong mapa is yung kulay blue na makita mo lang sa internet, nakatugon to sa may konkreto no? Sa kalsada, ito yung gagamitin ko. Pag inactual pala, yun pala irrigation canal, no? So hindi siya accurate. Hindi siya relevant sa inyong gagawing mapa. Useless siya. Okay? So that's the selection of appropriate data. The third one is choose an appropriate map type. Determine whether or not you must use a thematic map, topographic map, or other map types that suits the purpose. For example, choosing core of plot map to represent data by regions. Depende. For example, sa COVID-19 na patients, syempre gagamitin mo mapa, either yung thematic map na makikita doon, yung locations ng mga COVID patients. At the same time, yung radius niya, kung saan ba pwede yung scope ng community quarantine, di ba? So that's how you must use an appropriate map type. Okay? The fourth one is applying principles of map design. No? Nakita naman natin dito yung iba't ibang principles of map design para mas mapaganda natin or maintindihan natin yung mapa na ginagawa natin. And last is test and iterate. Gather feedback and make necessary adjustments for improved clarity. No? Conducting usability testing with the intended audience. For example, natapos mo na yung mapa mo, ipinalisit mo na sa mga audience mo. Ay, sir, ma'am, baka pwedeng ilagay natin dito yung ganitong aspect ng mapa or yung ganitong logo or legend or symbol para ma-identify natin kung ito talaga yung location. Yan. So, doon pa lang, mapapaganda mo na yung mapa mo in such a way na meron ka nang nakukuhang feedback na dapat or pwede natin idagdag, i-integrate natin doon sa output na ginawa mong mapa. Okay? Next, creating a visually appealing map. Use harmonious color schemes, balance visual elements, incorporate engaging symbols and icons, consider typography and font styling. No? So dito, lalabas na yung pagiging graphic artist ninyo, graphic designer niyo. Kasi, syempre, meron kayong gagamitin na iba't ibang harmonious color schemes. Kasi sa mapa, you just cannot present it in such a way na napakadal niya or wala man lang dating. I'm not saying that it must be colorful, but make it visually appealing sa lahat ng titingin. Now, for example, when you are making a nature map, For example, environmental map. Siyempre gagamitin yung mapa doon, yung color palette ng may green, may brown, di ba? So, mga ganong idea. When it comes to visual elements, i-distribute mo mabuti iba't ibang symbols and labels, no? At the same time, yung balance between the colors, no? And the third one is incorporating engaging symbols and icons. So if you want to pinpoint a particular landmark, lagyan mo ng ibang icon or ibang symbol, di ba? For example, yung Luneta Park, syempre lalagyan mo ng icon yun na, for example, Philippines or yung mukha ni Jose Rizal. Kasi that's how we symbolize Rizal, di ba? Yung piso, yung ulo niya, di ba? That's incorporating engaging symbols and icons. The last one is consider typography and font styling. So, dapat gagamit ko yung, again, ng mga madaling basahin mga font, hindi yung gusto mo lang yung font na merong buntot-buntot yung mga letters, di ba? Hindi pwede yung ganon. And ano ba ang impact ng meron kang magandang design na mapa? So we have enhanced communication, improved decision making, increased accessibility, and positive user experience. So when we say enhanced communication, diba? Clear maps facilitate effective communication of spatial information. For example, a transportation map, that helps our commuters in navigating the city. Sa mapa mo, makita mo doon yung iba't ibang bus terminals, di ba? Makita mo doon yung iba't ibang railway stations, di ba? Doon pa lang, alam na ng mga commuters natin kung saan sila pupunta. And that's how effectively you can communicate with your users. Next one is improved decision making. Well-designed maps assist decision makers by presenting data in a comprehensible manner. For example, a political map guiding policymakers in resource allocation. So, nakita nila yung mapa nila. And sa mapa nila, meron pala silang katabing ilog or river na talagang every year is lumalapad or lumalaki. So, they will now then allocate a budget to protect their, ano bang tawag dito? Their jurisdiction. Maglalagay sila ng slope protection or dike para hindi magtuloy-tuloy yung erosion ng lupa. So, that's a good map design is helping in decision making, especially in the local government unit or the government sector. Next one is increased accessibility. Easy to read maps make geographic information accessible to a wider audience. For example, an educational map helping students understand global geography. So dito naman, yung mga ginagamit nating mapa or ginagawa nating mapa is magagamit ng mga estudyante for educational purposes. Okay, not only for the students but as well as for researchers, scientists, 'di ba? Kung maalala niyo yung OpenStreetMap wherein there are volunteers that uploaded their data in the OpenStreetMap server. Nagiging accessible na siya not only for the private individuals, private institution, but also ginagamit nila ito sa government, di ba? So that's increased accessibility. Last one is positive user experience. Good design contributes to a positive experience for map users. So a user-friendly interactive map on a travel app, di ba? For example, ay napakaganda palang gamitin ng Waze, napakadali ng kanyang navigation. Kasi napakasimple at napakaganda ng kanyang design. So that's positive user experience. And last is the tools and resources that you can use in mapping. Okay, na i-discuss naman natin ito before, no? We have the the following popular software for map design: Arc, Q, Mapbox, Carto, and Google Earth Pro. So again, to discuss what cartography is, no, sa ating unang slides, let us watch this video. Okay?
Hello and welcome to Cartography. This is the first of a series of short films that accompany our MOOC on cartography, and to join me today is expert cartographer John Nelson, and even more expert cartographer, Edie Punt.
Hi.
And my name's Ken Field. And we're going to just spend a few minutes today talking about cartography, what it means, and what it means to be a smarter map maker, how we think about making maps, and really try to encourage you to think about going beyond the defaults. Maybe that's a good phrase to start off with. So, first off, let's define what cartography is, I guess. John, do you want to give us what your definition is?
What is cartography? Cartography is the communication of a geographic phenomenon, the visual communication. So the ography of cart. And it's this beautiful mix of geography, which is already awesome, and art, which is already awesome. And then you get awesome plus awesome, and it's just cartography.
Beat that.
Beat awesome plus awesome.
Okay, it's really combining the idea of where things are and why they're there, so the spatial component, with the art. And it's really about communication. So finding a way to communicate those spatial phenomenon in a way that resonates with people and better helps them understand.
I kind of like to think about the word or the letters that make up the word, because to me it encompasses a lot of different aspects. So we start off with the C, and that to me shouts compromise, because everything about making a map is a compromise. You know, a cartographer makes decisions all the time about what to put on the map, what to take off the map, and there are a lot of compromises.
Well, you can't put the whole world on a
Can't
piece
put
of paper.
everything on the map.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's why maps exist. Yeah.
Compromise.
Secondly, is this little word art. You know, there is a component of artistry in making a great looking map. This isn't just about making maps look pretty, but it's the artistry of communication. And the next letter along is the O, and I think that stands for opportunity. So making a map is an opportunity to tell your audience something interesting, to communicate a story, to give people facts.
Or if you don't make a map at all. The worst map is one that never gets made.
We're going to skip a whole load of letters and mush them into one here. Talk about graph. Graph to me is indicative of a mode of communication. So we go to school and we get taught to read and write, and we get taught to use numbers. We very rarely get taught to communicate using graphs or graphics. And there is a graphical language, a syntax, an alphabet even. That's what this MOOC is really all about, getting us to think about communicating in a graphical way. What works well, what perhaps doesn't work so well. So we might call that graphicacy.
Graphicacy.
Ooh, like literacy.
Yeah. And that's not my term,
Graphicacy.
this is a 1958 term.
Is that how it's
we're bringing
pronounced?
You can pronounce it how you like. We're bringing it back. You're going to learn to be graphicate.
Okay.
Yeah?
Graphic.
Okay.
Yep.
And then this final letter, just hanging out on the end here, the Y. To me, whenever you make a map, you ask yourself why. Why am I choosing this particular set of symbols? Why have I processed my data in a particular way? And I think that's always important to keep that in mind, is to ask yourself a lot of questions about why you're doing things in a certain way.
Every bit of ink or screen pixel you put on there has to have a reason.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just noise.
I think the why is a super powerful component of cartography.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to try to encourage everyone to do by taking this MOOC, is to think about the whys of making a map, and to learn to sort of not just accept software defaults, but go a little bit beyond them and think about working with them in order to create your beautifully artistic, graphicate map. So, why do you make a map?
I make a map because I have to. I love it. Making maps is so much fun. But really, I make a map because often a piece of data looks pretty interesting to me, and I think that there's something inside it.
So you start with a data set, typically.
I do.
Okay.
And the inverse of that is sometimes I'll have a technique I want to try out, and the data itself is kind of a second hand. Maybe I want to try a different kind of coastline effect. I don't necessarily always start with the data. I think a lot of cartographers work that way. You might want to try something interesting, and the data itself is just supporting that.
Sometimes you just need to explain the reality of a where. So maybe it's an article that lists a lot of different places and movement of goods or ideas or people, and that entire concept, that whole story is so much easier for somebody to understand if they can see it in a map.
So once we move past the purpose, you've got your purpose for the map, then we kind of get into a process.
Okay.
So, what's your process of map making?
I think a lot depends on what kind of map you're making. Who are you making it for? Are you making a map that's going to be on a piece of paper and, hung on a telephone pole? Well, that's going to be a different process than you're going to make a web map that's going to go out to, hundreds, thousands of
That's
people.
a good point. Know your audience, know why you're making the map.
Yeah.
Ask yourself why you're making the map.
For me, I like to think of the process as an iterative one.
Definitely.
Because you never have a linear process of starting to make the map and then
Yep.
finish. It doesn't
Yep.
work like that. Quite often you find things out as you go along and you change things or...
And it's hard to know when you're done.
Sure.
Like any creative process, you always want to tweak something. And if you see it later, you think,
Or
I wish I could have done something differently.
you're Ken, you think it's done, then Edie walks by your office and says, Ken,
I don't like that.
Nope.
Change it.
Yeah.
I also think that maybe, there's an element of truth in 90% of the map takes 10% of the time.
Yeah.
And then, the final 10% takes maybe another 90% of the time. So you do have to work out when you're done with the map. So maybe that's a good place to talk a little bit about some of the constraints on map making, because this doesn't just exist in a beautiful, open, I can do what I like kind of environment, right?
If you pay for the band, you name the tune. Right? So if you're making a map for someone, you have to take their input, you have to know what their purpose is and what their objectives are, and you're sort of stuck with whatever data you're working with because it's been handed to you and you have a task and you have a deadline.
Well, and then there's the classic cartography constraint of you can pick your scale, you can pick your extent of geography, and you can pick your size of the output, but you can only have two of those three things, right? You can't have all three.
Right,
So,
but you can overcome that with multi-scale web mapping, but
Right,
then you've maybe
yep.
got other constraints like the
Exactly.
technology. And also, it's a good idea to keep the user in mind. Who's going to be looking at your map? Are you making a map for children? Are you making it for school kids? Are you making it for foreign language tourists?
right,
These
somebody
are all
have
issues that you need to
color,
think about.
vision impairment.
Right. I like to think about the old adage of form and function. The form of your map should support the function that you're trying to communicate.
And certainly sometimes there's an inherent theme in the data that can have an influence on what design sensibility you bring to the map that you're making.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can go too far.
Yeah, you don't.
Well, like a over-the-top pirate map with flaming skulls and...
Yeah.
Well,
pirate
if you're,
ships
if you're mapping something that's a really serious topic, you don't want to have a goofy, lighthearted font, for
Right.
example.
Exactly. Like Comic Sans.
Like Comic Sans.
So going back to this idea of graphicacy, you thought we were done, didn't
Yeah,
you?
graphicacy.
I think of a nice way to making a map is to structure the way you lay out the graphics to communicate. So if you think about the written word, perhaps in a book, for instance, or in the spoken word, we're linking letters into words, into paragraphs, sentences, and hopefully we're being reasonably intelligible. People are following what we're saying.
Yep.
And everything's coming at you in serial, one word after the other. We're trained to think about
Yeah, it's a train of thought.
decoding
Yeah, train of thought.
language in that way. But with maps, you look at any of those on the wall behind, it's everything's in one go,
Yeah,
right?
it's all at once.
So our brain is struggling to try to disentangle all of that and thinking about trying to structure that message is important.
Yeah,
It's a constraint.
I think
yeah?
you can use the tools that are pretty well known in graphic design to bring out what's the first message, what's the most important thing that you want somebody to see first, and use those graphical tools, the graphicacy, make sure that the primary message comes out first.
And one strategy is you can make a series of maps, and each series of maps introduces some kind of walking into a phenomenon.
Right.
Start with a broad view
But
of
even
something and
there,
take
they're
a
going to
closer look.
have a lot in common to sort of ground your
Absolutely.
reader, so
There'll be a family of maps.
they are oriented to what's changing about the message on each map.
I kind of like looking at old maps.
I love it.
Because they give you hints about what works really well, what perhaps doesn't work. So, let's go back. Let's look at Erwin Royce's Atlas of Global Geography, 1944.
Classic.
He
Beautiful.
makes gorgeous maps.
I find he uses symbology and pictorial components and icons and colour really magnificently. And when you think about some of the constraints on the technology of the time, you know, printing, 1944.
I appreciate his hand. It's before these tools that automated a lot of the process.
Right.
Right. He's forming these largely from scratch, and airbrushing and painting and stenciling, and it's just profound how much effort was involved back then. And when you have a craft that involves so much effort from front to back, then I think you're more invested in something instead of just kind of cranking through it in a digital process.
The thing that he was so masterful at is depicting landforms, and I think that is where he really nails the aesthetics in his maps. And as artistic as they are, they're incredibly accurate too. He's not just putting mountain ranges here because they fit in. I mean, that's actually where the mountains are and what they look like. I mean, he nails it.
Yeah. What I quite like, of course, and Atlas isn't just about topography and natural world.
Right.
He uses some really revolutionary, innovative statistical charting. You know,
Right.
sort of almost 3D prism maps.
Yep.
And amazing cutaways,
Yeah, and again, doing this by hand.
profiles of these landforms.
You know, working out what angles to actually show all of this at that's going to work. And I think more than anything, what this atlas teaches me is, you know, the amount of time it must have taken to think through all of this work.
Yeah.
And that to me is maybe a difficulty with modern cartography. This compression of time. You can make a map in 10 seconds now, whereas maybe it took him 2 weeks to do the same thing, or even longer. And that's why we're trying to encourage this thinking about cartography and going back to some of these classics. We're going to now talk about some great cartographers. We're going to call them map people. I'm going to throw out a name and let's get a reaction. Tom Patterson.
Tom, yeah. Tom is somebody who I don't think has ever done anything or come up with an idea that he hasn't openly shared with everyone.
So Tom works for the National Park Service in the US, and anybody who's been to a national park will have used one of his products, one of his maps, and you know they are works of art. But he's kind of got a side job of, like you say, just doing stuff, and websites and various resources. And really, the whole point about talking about these map people is go and check out their work.
Yeah.
Go and have a look what Tom's been doing over his career.
Yeah.
Check out his website and get some inspiration.
Something that I'm especially impressed with about Tom is he's got these two worlds, right? This very artistic sensibility and then a technical mastery.
Yeah.
So the mathematics involved in projections is, of course, intimidating to somebody like me. But he has his own projection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's got that over there, and meanwhile, he's doing these amazing shaded relief works of art.
Yeah.
And that's all the same human being rolled up into one Tom Patterson
Well,
package.
is it? I mean, there
Maybe.
maybe there's more than one. Who knows? Anyway,
Yeah.
check out Tom's work. It's great. A lot of the times we make our maps using computers now, but it hasn't always been that way. And I thought it might be fun to have a look at some of the oldie-worldy tools of the trade.
Yeah.
It's got a ring to it.
I like it.
I'm just going to pick up my little magic box here. Ooh,
What do you got, Ken?
what about that?
Looks familiar, Ken.
Mr. Nelson, what is it?
Looks unfamiliar, Ken. I don't know what this is. I don't know what a person would use this for.
Okay. Edie.
Well, Ken, as you know, this belongs to me.
As you know, yeah.
Yeah. Yep, this is my toy.
Yep.
So this is a scriber. And this is actually a special type of scriber. It's a swivel scriber. As you notice, parts of it swivel.
It's swiveled.
There's even a little pin in here where you can set it to not swivel.
Is this a line drawer, like an analog line
Yes.
drawer, and you can swap out pen
But
tips or
those-
scrape tips?
You're right, it's scrapes. We used to make maps
couldn't
in
have-
reverse.
couldn't
So
have.
we'd have something called scribe coat.
Okay.
You'd scrape off with this exactly where you wanted the light to come through, which would be where the ink would be.
Try and make your maps in reverse and see how you get.
Yeah.
Well,
So
actually-
this one swivels.
There you
So
go.
that's
When was the
what
last
this-
time you used this?
In school.
2009.
No.
2000.
And that's
2008.
probably a good point at which to stop this week's tool of the week.
Scriber.
On to Carto fails. That's my term. I think I made it up. I may have stolen it from somewhere, but a lot of things get me a bit angsty about maps. You know, when I see things on them and they like, "Argh." One of my pet peeves is hyperbole. You know, it's the exaggerated statement on a map. You know, this map shows something wonderful and fantastic, or even, you know, here are 10 maps that are going to change the way you think about,
Great.
you know, life, the universe, and everything. And it's just like, let's keep our maps a little bit more respectful and perhaps a little less shouty.
I don't need to know that your map is a map. And I don't need to know that the legend on a map is
You
a
don't label
legend.
your legend as such?
If you
What
make
if
the
somebody doesn't
legend
know?
Too much.
What about I love maps? We all love maps, right? Yeah, that's why we get into
This is a
Carto.
Carto fail?
Well, it's a Carto fail for some.
I would say it's not a Carto fail. I think it's a pet peeve. I hear a lot of people say, I've always loved maps. And the thing
This
is...
isn't a Carto fail, this is a Carto good.
It is good, it is good, but...
It's a Carto success.
It is, yeah, it's an overly obvious statement.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, you've convinced me.
Yeah.
So
Not that I
you
needed
no longer
convincing.
love maps, right?
This is,
This is an awkward
I
moment.
need to go take a nap.
Well, let's finish off with death by pushpin. Yeah, red dot fever. There's this,
yeah.
this tendency,
Measles maps, I've
Yeah,
heard
it's
it
this
called.
tendency of just I've got data. I've got 2 trillion points. and
I've got
it's all
chicken
gotta
pox.
All got to go on my map. It's all got to go.
Where is it all?
And that to me just says that the person making the map didn't think about what they could leave off. You know,
Yeah.
It's just like
Yeah.
I've got all this data.
Or they could
I'm
have
gonna
aggregated in
like,
some
could-
way.
You could do a lot of stuff. We're going to learn a lot of techniques in the exercises on the MOOC about how to process this data. But, you know, does your map have a title that doesn't make sense? Does it have a lot of red dots on it? Does it say, I love maps? So with that, I'd like to offer you both a biscuit.
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, I think you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, one of each.
Lovely.
Okay. Thanks.
Cheers.